So this idea that life is necessarily this endless cycle of suffering, disappointment, and desire helps to explain why it is that art for Schopenhauer is such an important medium, is such an important way to relate to the world. Because Schopenhauer claims, and this should remind us of that disinterested claim going back to Kant. For Kant, you'll remember it with pure beauty. We're not desiring anything. It's not about our own emotions. It's not about the objects themselves. It's just this experience of my sensory faculties in free play. Schopenhauer has a very similar orientation to Kant with that. And so art for Schopenhauer becomes one of the few ways in which we can gain relief from that endless cycle of suffering, desire, being let down from our desires, and then suffering some more. Schopenhauer, like we said, had studied Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, and he says there may be some people, he calls them saints, there may be some people who are able to be so spiritually enlightened that they can look at the world without desire and live in a world of peace and contentment. But Schopenhauer argues that for most of us, the life of the saint is just not achievable. What the ordinary person, however, can do to get out of that cycle of suffering and desire and suffering is they can look at the world through art, and they can appreciate art. So for the ordinary people, our only relief comes when we observe the world without desire, and that's what we do in art. A couple of examples might help to illustrate this point. Think about something like the way in which we separate what counts as pornography with what counts as art. If you took something like Botticelli's Birth of Venus or Michelangelo's Statue of David and called that pornographic, hopefully most people would respond to you and say, if that seems pornographic to you, it must be because you don't understand the work of art or the intention of the work of art. Something went wrong if those seem pornographic to you, because pornography is about desire. It's about increasing desire, increasing appetite, and that's its function, even according to the Supreme Court. On the other hand, something like art isn't designed to increase your appetite. It's designed on this view for the sort of disinterested, relative to the appetite, experience or contemplation of the nature of the world. Schopenhauer talks in one point about something like a river and our ability to experience a river. Schopenhauer says if you were to see a river as something like a work of art, you could see a river as a beautiful sensory experience. You could sit by the river and you could just experience the beauty of being by a river and being lost in that experience and have an experience of peace, an aesthetic experience that removed you from all desire, all need, all want to own. But if you think about what rivers represent in the history of civilization, rivers have always represented for us things like ways to get food, an easy way to transport things. Civilizations are built around rivers because of everything that they do for us in a functional sense. We can get water from it. And so we almost always experience something like a river in our everyday lives as something that is just functionality for us. It's going to pipe water from the river itself into your house to meet your appetite. But there are at least some times, maybe when you're traveling, that you stop and you take a photograph of a river or you sit by the river just to be lost in that experience of being lost in nature, absorbed in the environment, and letting your desire to use this river for anything or to own this river just dissipate as you're lost in the experience of the thing itself. This can help to show why, for Schopenhauer, music is the highest form of art. If you think about what art is trying to do for us, the purpose of art for us, for Schopenhauer, the purpose of art is to pull us away from desire, pull us away from that experience of the world which pulls us into the cycle of suffering. Everything that represents objects, let's say even Michelangelo's David, could, in the wrong context, inspire for us a desire to own. It could inspire for us, along the lines of Plato, a connection to the physical world or even physical desire of a bodily nature. But music, because it's just abstract form and sound, Schopenhauer claims that music, it doesn't represent things. Things can awaken our desires. Instead, music represents the will itself. You can imagine something like a classical composition in which you see various motifs that kind of interweave and battle with each other and come in and out of a composition. You could imagine, I think, the nature of music as an expression of the will without representing actual things. Architecture is somewhat similar to music in that architecture doesn't represent things. It's not a depiction of human life and isn't as likely to inspire in us that same kind of desire and longing. Architecture is easier for us to appreciate for its pure form. At one point, he refers to architecture as if it was music frozen in its shape. Makes me think of something like the Disney concert hall that's represented here. So with these things together, we have for Schopenhauer an expression of the ultimate goal of life. The ultimate goal of life is to stop our suffering by seeing our whole lives from that same artistic perspective. So just like the artist has that ability to detach themselves from desire and appreciate the beauty of objects themselves, not as objects, but just being lost in that experience with beautiful things, Schopenhauer argues that the most enlightened person is someone who can experience the world in the same way, can experience the world to be lost in the world as a beautiful aesthetic experience, and all their experience, not just when they're looking at art, shares that same kind of detachment, absorption in a world of beauty that can make this life of suffering tolerable for us because we're experiencing the world without this endless cycle of desire, but just with this experience of appreciation and immersion in the beautiful. This quote, which is also in your reading from Schopenhauer's work, The World as Will and Representation, helps to express that same process. It's very well encapsulated here and maybe worth reading. Schopenhauer says, if raised by the power of the mind, a man relinquishes the common way of looking at things, which always has as the final goal a relation to his own will. If he thus ceases to consider the where, the when, and the why, and the whither of things, and looks simply and solely at the what, right? So that's seeing the world and the things in it, not for how they relate to my desire, but just as what they are, represented to me and the experience of it. He goes on, if further, he does not allow abstract thought, the concepts of the reason, to take possession of his consciousness, but instead of all this, gives the whole power of his mind to perception, sinks himself entirely in this, and lets his whole consciousness be filled with the quiet relation of the natural object actually being perceived, whether it's a landscape, a tree, a building, or whatever it may be. Inasmuch as he loses himself in this object, he forgets even his own individuality, his will, and he continues to exist as a pure subject, the clear mirror of the object, so that it is as if the object alone were there, without any one to perceive it, and he can no longer separate the perceiver from the perception, but both have become one, because the whole consciousness is filled and occupied with one single sensuous picture. If this is achieved, then that which is known is no longer the particular thing as such, but it is the idea, the eternal form, the immediate objectivity of the will at this grade, and therefore, he who is sunk in this perception is no longer individual, for in such perception the individual has lost himself. Instead, he is pure, will-less, painless, timeless subject of knowledge. The ideas for Schopenhauer are not like they are for Plato, where they exist as ultimate reality, because ultimate reality for Schopenhauer is just the will. But the ideas are the way in which the will expresses itself in its most primordial form as it's on its way to being perceived through representation. By being lost in art, becoming one in our perception with the thing, the ego and the I and my desire, and even my way of thinking about and categorizing things, all of that slips away as I approach just being a subject, just being a perceiver outside of that cycle of suffering, loss, pain, and desire. For most of us, it's only really through art that we learn this skill. As we advance toward enlightenment, we might be able to experience this same pureless, timeless, artistic experience of the world in more and more of what we observe in nature and elsewhere.